up. I'll go ahead and introduce the webinar. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar titled Metabolomics for Wellness and Aging, Enhancing Proactive Patient Care. I'm Daniel Gomeri, the founder and CEO of iollo, and your host for today. Really glad you could join us. So today we've got someone special with us, Professor Michael Snyder. Mike is a big name in genomics and personalized medicine and is doing some incredible work at Stanford University, where he leads the Department of Genetics and the Center for Genomics and Personalized Medicine. Besides that, he runs a highly successful research lab that's doing wonders in the field. Mike has made many groundbreaking discoveries, including in understanding genetic variations and their impact on our health and diseases. And today he's going to share his insights on metabolomics, a field that's reshaping how we approach staying healthy and aging well. His research really highlights how metabolomics can change patient care by making it more personalized, actionable, and predictive. What's also fascinating about Mike is his entrepreneurial spirit. He's not just an academic, he's also an advisor and co-founder of several startups. In 2022, he and I co-founded iollo, which focuses on using metabolomics profiling to enhance wellness and longevity. We'd love to hear any questions you have, so please feel free to send them into the Q&A feature, and Mike and I will answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Again, thanks for joining us, and let's get started.
Great. Well, thanks, Stan, for letting me show what we're up to in metabolomics. It's really a booming field, very exciting. And so, as Stan says, save up lots of questions. Feel free to ask them. All right. So just start by definition. Many of you probably know this already, but metabolites are very, very important compounds that are in your body. There's over 1 trillion when you add them all up. And they're defined as small molecules and typically less than 1,500 Daltons. And as I'm sure you know, they play critical roles in biology and disease. There's lots of famous metabolites out there. ATP, I'm sure you know about. It's an important energy source for your cells. Cholesterol is an important molecule that leads to the production of many hormones and also used to comprise your cellular membranes. We have many hormones that are small molecules, important for cell signaling and signaling of all kinds of processes. And another famous metabolite I'm sure you're all familiar with is phenylalanine, one of the amino acids that actually, if you have mutations in a pathway that lead up to build up this, you get phenylketonuria, which is a serious problem, but it can be caught at birth and controlled. And that's the one nice thing about metabolites. They're not only important, but you can actually modulate their levels through both diet and also through drugs, because many drugs are metabolite analogs. So metabolomics is the field that actually studies the collection of metabolites. And so the collection of metabolites that comprise a cell, tissue, organism is your metabolome. And the actual size of metabolome is not known. There may be, some people say, as many as 50,000 metabolites. There's certainly many thousands of them, and we don't know what they all are. People are actively studying these now and trying to figure out what their biological functions are. So your metabolome actually comes from many sources. You do make a fair amount of it. Your microbiome makes a ton of it, actually, with the food you eat, which is yet another source, can feed your microbiome and many complicated vitamins. If you've ever seen the structure B12, very, very complicated vitamin. And your microbiome synthesizes very precisely. And of course, another source of metabolites in your body are environmental exposures. Many of these are nasty compounds, and good examples there are plastics and pesticides. So all these different compounds comprise your metabolome, and as indicated here, they come from a variety of sources. So the thing about the metabolome is it's chemically very, very diverse. So you have hydrophobic and hydrophilic molecules, you have positive and negatively charged molecules. And it's as such, it's very hard to study them using traditional methods that are used for proteomics and genomics and transcriptomics. But it turns out the mass spectrometer is a great instrument for doing this, because you can separate out molecules, use something called liquid chromatography when coupled to mass spectrometers, can separate out all the different kinds of molecules and let you detect them with a really incredibly high sensitivity, in fact, down to atomoles even. It's really incredible how sensitive these are. And as such, in the last 15 years, it's just been an explosion to be able to study thousands and thousands of these. So the way we got into this, many of you may know, our lab's well known for its big data approaches. And traditionally, the way we sort of analyze people now in a physician's office is we actually don't make that many measurements. And in the area of metabolomics, we make very few. Typically, you'll measure glucose, cholesterol, meaning LDL and HDL, and a few other molecules. And some of the more concierge services will look at, hormones like testosterone and thyroid hormones, especially if you're off in certain categories. But the number of metabolites we typically study clinically is very, very low. So in our lab, we've pioneered the use of big data for trying to study people while they're healthy in the earliest times of disease. And we set up something we call personal omics profiling, where the idea is we'll sequence people's genomes and then we'll use these different omics technologies, transcriptome, microbiome, and metabolome, to do deep data profiles on people, typically through studying their blood and urine. And in this particular project, we also do deep clinical tests and wearables and other things of that sort. And we've been profiling a group of people for about 11 years. And this has turned out to be very, very powerful. What we've done is even for the first 3.5 years, nearly half the people learned something important about their health from pre-symptomatically by doing these deep data profiles, so we could get a much clearer picture of their health. And metabolomics was one of the important assays used in this for actually seeing when things were off. The other thing we discovered by doing this profiling over time is that we could see how people are aging. And it turns out everyone's aging differently. And I've shown 2 examples here. This person in the middle, their top biochemical pathway that changes over time is their cardiac hypertrophic signaling pathway, meaning they're a cardioager. And we later learned this person was stage 2 hypertensive. This person over here is a typical ager. Their immune pathway, their metabolic and other pathways all go up over time. And we can profile all this and see this. Most of your molecules don't change, by the way, but a certain number of critical ones do. So we call these different aging patterns ageotypes. And so we were only empowered to find 4. We can find many, many more now. But each column's a different person, each row's a different ageotype. And the people over here, they're aging in all 4 categories. This person's aging in 3 of the 4, not much of a kidney age, but aging other ways. This person's a kidney ager, this one's kidney and metabolic, and so on. So we can see people's aging patterns by doing these data profiles over time. So one of the other things we've done as part of the study is set up remote monitoring. Now, I know what this is going to sound like. Ours actually works pretty well. We've spent 7 years perfecting this, but the idea is you can do what's called microsampling. Little drops of blood you take either from your fingertip or, as shown here, from your shoulder. I know it looks like a big device. It's actually quite painless. So you put that on your shoulder. It drains out precise amounts of blood, which you then send essentially to our laboratory. And in the lab, we're measuring about 2,200 different analytes, including proteins, metabolites, and lipids. And the metabolomics have been super, super powerful for seeing people's, if you will, biochemical profile. So this worked well. We could actually get good pictures of people's, if you will, biochemical state. And so from this technology and being able to develop this assay, we've spun off iollo, which we think is a powerful way to try and get metabolomics profile out to the world, if you will, so we can get a wellness assay for following people's metabolic, if you will, wellness. And so the way this works is that you actually take a home microsample. We then, you send that to lab, and we'll measure over 500 analytes, which cover essentially 20 different wellness domains. And also, I'll get to this in a minute, we can actually see how you're aging. And what's powerful about this technology, not only are we getting a deep, if you will, metabolic profile of people, but the information is quite actionable, meaning you can do dietary modifications, behavioral modifications to actually improve these markers. And I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. So we think this information is quite powerful for trying to extend people's health span. So just to show you this, if you do this test, meaning you take a sample, mail it to us, we'll give you back a report that covers these different categories, over 20 categories. I'm showing 6 of them here. So your metabolic health, this is showing your immune health, inflammation, oxidative stress, bone health, longevity. And these markers we follow, it doesn't replace, you still do your LDL, HDL, but it actually adds much more because we're getting a much deeper profile. So we'll measure things that you wouldn't normally be measuring and get a better picture of people's metabolic state, if you will. But one of these 20 areas that we measure is actually people's longevity, if you will, their aging profile, which is pretty powerful. There's some important markers here. Getting that in a minute. And so if people do this test, they mail it to us, and then we give them back a report. You get back a health report that talks about some of them, a summary of what's going on for these different categories, say your metabolic health, based on the markers we're following. And we can also get information about people's aging. So this is obviously a nice example for someone. Their real age is just over 31, but their biological age based on the metabolic profile is 22. So again, this is kind of interesting, but it's more than that. It's actually actionable. You'll see in a minute. So here's another one. This is a pretty typical example. That last person was kind of perfect. This is a more typical example. People will have certain markers that are actually fine and in good shape. And there's inflammation or aging inflammation, if you will, is actually looking good. The metabolic age is a little bit off, and same with the heart age based on the markers that we're following. These are markers that can actually give you a readout, if you will, on these wellness parameters. And so this particular person actually is a little bit older. Their biological age is older than their chronological age. But the nice thing is the information you're looking at is targeted to areas that people can improve on. And so what we've done, the company's actually set up an proprietary AI system for reading all this data, has its own proprietary database with literature that it's curated and can bring in, and then actually figure out what the key findings are. And it has to be tuned just right, which is what the company's been able to do. And from that, it actually generates a health report. We'll generate a health report for physicians that you can use. We can also generate one for the patients themselves, but I think relevant to this group is the reports actionable for physicians, and it'll give readouts like this. While their fat burning efficiencies are concerned, maybe, and because we're also pulling in diet information, if they will share their medical records, which you'll have, you can actually feed that into the AI engine and get a more precise interpretation, if you will. Here's another example: elevated glutamate levels. Gives you a possible readout for what's going on here, and so on and so forth. And the physicians we've shown this to have found this to be very, very interesting and very useful. And then not only do we give a readout of what's going on, but we can give a readout of what you might do about it. So for example, based on the information we just gave you, you can actually make recommendations. Same thing, all AI driven, where, well, you can correct some of this. For example, a high cholesterol metabolic profiles you can collect by having more physium hus, for example. And here are some other recommendations. So we'll give you a recommendation report back to the physicians, which they can relate to their patients. One of the important things is that because we're tracking people over time, we're recommending every 3 months, we can actually track people's health. And so when they get back these reports, people actually do take action. This one happens to be my markers based on the information I got. I actually did some steps to try and improve my health, which were successful. So you can follow these different categories. Here are the markers. And you can see if you go from red to green, that means you're improving what's going on. So we have these markers that will let people improve, essentially follow their improvements based on their metabolic profiles. So overall, it works. This general idea works pretty well. And based on the first 700 users we've had so far, 95% of people who've gotten their reports have actually, made lifestyle changes and improved their biomarkers based just on that very first test result. So we think the information, again, it's like getting a much clearer picture of people's metabolic health with actionable recommendations that they can act upon. And you as a physician should be able to better help your patients by actually getting this sort of information. So overall, what I've told you about is our home sampling method that can measure well over 500 metabolites. These metabolites provide very useful markers into wellness and aging. And the information, most importantly, is actionable so that people can make lifestyle changes. For example, certainly they'll say exercise anyway, but I think it's the diet recommendations that are powerful as well as other things. We can also, because we're pulling in information from the AI about their medications, we can actually integrate that information into the recommendations that are fed back to you. So